Yeah, I think we're all set.
I'm getting the Facebook streaming going.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I see we've got a few folks with us and we are recording. So just let me know if you're ready, Amanda.
Sorry, Bill. This is actually the first time I've done this, so.
I've got to notice that we are live streaming on Facebook.
Hey.
All right. So why don't we go ahead and get started? You guys ready?
Yes.
Ready.
Cool. Hey, good evening and welcome. This is a live webinar. It's being recorded and will be available later. But it is a webinar on the Windham Open Space Master Plan that's currently under development. It is July 29th, and thank you very much for joining us. My name is Ben Smith. I'm with North Star Planning. And Sarah Del Ghizo is also with us from North Star. And at this point, I will turn it over to Amanda Lassard, the town's planning director.
Hi, I'm Amanda Lassard. I'm the planning director. Thank you so much for joining us. This open space plan is a long time coming. The open space plan, the development of one was a recommendation in our comprehensive plan update that was adopted in 2017. The purpose of the plan is to be a guide to elected and appointed officials. It will be identifying properties that are important for preservation, for farms and forestry and critical and natural resources, and open spaces for recreation and conservation. Certainly the context in the last few years has been important because we've been having lots of conversations around the growth pressure, especially in our rural areas. And there's been, a long history in Windham's past planning efforts of identifying the need to preserve open space and retain Windham's rural character. So in the last couple of years, we've been working on in an effort to preserve some of this rural character, some other zoning changes. We've had some public meetings where we've heard public input on the importance of retaining rural character and preserving these open spaces for its importance for environmental reasons to preserve it from development. So we lost my notes. So the open space plan, though, is going to drill down more specifically than what we've heard in past comprehensive plans, so that we can be more detailed in areas that are important, so that when we work with the planning board, we know when development and open space planning is important, so that we, when we're budgeting for preservation areas or planning for maintaining or enhancing our current parks and recreation, or purchasing additional open space. And we've recently adopted open space impact fees, so that we'll have some funds available to actually make progress on increasing our inventory of open spaces in town. So thanks for being here. I will say, as a webinar, participants that are attending here, you don't see who else is here besides Ben and Sarah and I, but logged into this meeting, there's some town staff that is listening. Our Parks and Recreation Director, Linda Brooks, is listening. Our Sustainability Coordinator, Gretchen Anderson, is listening. And we're asking that if you want to interact with us on this meeting, you use the Q&A function that's down at the bottom of your screen. You can enter a question later or anytime as we're speaking, and there will be portions, I think Ben will come back to you on when we will be answering some of those questions. As we're also live streaming on Facebook, we'll be capturing those comments. If people are watching on Facebook and they comment on the Facebook stream, we'll attempt to answer those live as well. So I'll turn it back over to Ben to kind of give us an update on where we are in the progress of developing the open space plan.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is a pretty exciting step in the process. This is our first chance in this age of COVID-19 to actually speak directly with folks. So even though you'll be sending in questions and comments through chat, I think that this is a good chance for some conversation to take place, and not just us talking to you. We want to hear from you folks as well. So we have been working on this plan since early May, and the process since that point has really been through the development of a website called windhamopenspace.com. And a number of folks have registered on there, taken a survey, had a chance to drop pins and make notes on a map. And there's going to be a lot more content coming as well. But I think a big part of what we want to do tonight, before we start actually drafting plans and recommendations, is to pause for a moment and share back what we've heard and what we've learned so far. And that's going to involve a short presentation. Sarah's going to go over some of the things that we've gathered through the website. And then we're going to talk about how the recommendations will likely be shaping up, some broad categories of recommendations that we want to at least give you a preview of. And then we're going to be talking a little bit about next steps in the process. So we've been working at this since April, May timeframe, and we'll talk about what happens after tonight's meeting. So again, thank you for coming, and I will turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit more about what we've heard through the web.
Great, thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Delguizo. As Ben mentioned, I'm the planner with North Star Planning, and I've been helping on the open space plan. So I wanted to just take some time to go over some of the survey results that we've received. The open space survey has been posted on windhamopenspace.com since early May, as Ben said. So far, we've received about 275 survey results. So out of the 275 surveys, 95% of respondents did answer that they do use Windham open space or recreational facilities. And out of the 5 people who responded that they don't, the top reason was because they don't necessarily know what's available or where spaces are located. So a few of the top activities that were highlighted as people kind of use them the most often included walking or jogging in Windham open spaces. That included dog walking as well. So 67% of respondents replied that they used it at least weekly, if not daily. Water access was another common use. 49% of respondents replied that they used access to water through town-owned spaces weekly, if not daily. 35% stated that they observed wildlife or bird watching at least weekly, if not daily. And 36% said that they use playgrounds at least weekly as well. Winter activities were also highlighted as one of the most participated in activities, although it was less common, less of a monthly or less of a weekly or daily activity, but more of a monthly activity. Survey respondents stated that when they're using open spaces, what they're really looking for is a place to relax, unplug, and decompress. And they also stated that they're using Windham open spaces to observe and experience nature as well. Interestingly enough, mountain biking and biking on trails was rarely used in the Windham open spaces according to survey results, as well as ATV and snowmobiles. Compared to some of the other activities highlighted in the plan. So, lost my notes. Okay. So water access, well, I thought it was interesting. So 80% of survey respondents stated that they do use the town beaches, whereas 51% stated that they use town boat launches. So definitely people are using, accessing the water through town spaces, but they're using it in different ways. So structured play spaces. So this could be, tennis courts, basketball courts, skate park, and the playgrounds in town. I kind of broke out, that as a specific category. So 58% of respondents stated that they do use playgrounds. And once again, this was kind of a monthly, weekly, or daily activity. So 58% said that they use it at least monthly, if not more often than that. Athletic fields, 57% of respondents stated that they use the athletic fields, like I said, at least monthly, if not more often. 42% for tennis and basketball courts, and then the skate park is used by 18% of respondents. So this is just kind of an interesting breakdown, the different ways people are using Windham open spaces in town. A little further on in the survey, we started asking people, a little bit more about what types of Windham open space that they're using, so less so the activities and more so the specific spaces. And then we kind of wanted to get a sense as to what people thought we should be prioritizing for the town to, hold or acquire specific spaces. So the top kind of four types of open spaces that were really highlighted as something that the town should be focusing on was really protection of water supplies, so protection of groundwater as well as municipal wells. Also properties with hiking or walking trails. That was also seen in, walking, jogging, and hiking were one of the top used activities as well. So that definitely reflects that there. Wildlife corridors, 90% of respondents said that we should also, prioritize conservation of wildlife corridors and habitats. And then 87% mentioned forest lands and woods as something that the town should also prioritize. So we want to take a minute now to kind of open up the floodgates for some questions. So we have a poll here that kind of digs a little bit deeper from, thinking about what types of spaces that the town should prioritize to how the town should be prioritizing it. So I want to give people a chance to, throw some questions in the question and answer chat box if they'd like, if something from the survey kind of sparked their interest. And then while people are doing that, if you want to participate, so this is a text poll. So you'll text your vote using the numbers on the kind of the middle of the screen. So the number starting in 18, that's your which answer you want to choose. And then you'll text the number to the number at the top. So it's 650-600-9016. If you want to, you can also visit that website, m.smspoll.net, to submit an answer as well. So that'll be real-time results as people submit their answer. But I want to give you guys all a minute to think about some questions, and then I'll hand it back over to Ben to go into some categories of recommendations.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. I'm going to jump in here while people are typing in that number. This is, I was describing this earlier as this is the elevator hold music for people who don't have a specific question they want to type in. This is a way to just provide some feedback and stay engaged a little bit in the presentation. So for those of you who do want to type in, down at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a Q&A button you can use to chat responses to the panel here. And you can also, if you're viewing on Facebook, basically type in those, and Amanda is going to monitor that discussion for us. So while we are finishing that up, Sarah, would you mind maybe just taking a minute to tell us what you observed or what you gathered from the open-ended responses? The survey had a lot of those kinds of check boxes, selecting dots, and things that are easy to quantify. And I think you did a great job walking us through that. But maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the second part, the open-ended questions, while people are figuring out how to vote via text. Thanks.
Definitely. So the open-ended responses were really interesting. They definitely echoed a lot of what was seen in, kind of the poll type ranking type questions. There were multiple comments that had to do with water access, so town-owned public water access to the lakes in town, specifically access to Sebago. Also, preservation and conservation of water quality and resources was brought up quite a few times as well. Limiting development and growth in specific parts of town was also brought up, which I know that echoes some of the previous work that Amanda has done as well, with kind of maintaining that rural character of Windham. Another thing that was brought up, there were quite a few people who had mentioned, we're a young family that recently moved to town and we'd love, a bigger green space where we can hold, community events like concerts and farmers markets and things like that. That was echoed quite a few times as well. Those were probably the most, the comments that kind of, people stated multiple times. There were multiple people who brought up all of those topics. So I would say those are kind of the big highlights.
Great, thank you. Amanda, do you have anything you want to add, or anything happening over on the Facebook side?
Not right now, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I think one interesting thing to note about this SMS poll, and there will be another one a little later, so you can keep your phones handy, is that this is going to continue to collect information and responses from people even after the event is done. So if you view a recording, or if we move on too fast, or you decide you don't want to do it, and then at the last minute you decide you do want to do it, but we've already moved on from this slide, you can just go back to the recording and text in at your leisure, and that'll continue to be active for the duration of the project website, windhamopenSpace.com. Okay, so why don't we move on to the next part here, and I do see one question before we move on. That's come in over the Zoom chat. Any indicators as to whether people that wanted to acquire property on Sebago Lake or other water bodies, are they willing to have their taxes increased in order to do so? That is one of the things where we need to determine. There was not a specific question about the desire for residents to kind of how much and how to prioritize specifically in regard to taxes. But we do want to kind of move into that prioritization and starting to tease apart some of these competing goals so that we can present a good list of priorities that have broad levels of support moving forward. That's really kind of where this next set of slides go into. So keep those questions coming. We'll get to those in a few minutes, but let's walk through some of these slides, and I think that'll give people a little bit more to think about. So there are broad categories of recommendations. It's still too early to make specific recommendations, but based on what we've heard, based on previous planning efforts, of which, this is in a long line of planning efforts, as Amanda had indicated at the beginning. The categories that are starting to coalesce around things we've heard have to do with connections, access and equity, management of existing open space assets, and conservation. And connections really have to do with connections between open space assets, as well as connections to other destinations. Access and equity have to do with, not only the distance as a measure of availability or access, but how accessible are different types of open space assets in Windham. Management of individual properties. I think that the question posed here is individual properties, but could you have multiple uses? And I think there's a number of good examples today, and I'll single out Dundee Park, where there's a number of different things happening. There's a public beach, there's trails, there's picnic areas, there's community programming, a number of things happening on that property. And are there other ways to do some of those things on other properties while managing potential conflicts or competing uses? And finally, conservation is I think what Sarah had really been talking about. A number of people were valuing and really have in their mind when they think an open space plan, they're thinking of large habitat blocks. They're thinking of preserving and protecting rural landscapes, whether they are undisturbed natural areas or maybe they are working landscapes. But there's also conservation of history that's emerged as an idea here early in the planning process that we want to explore a little bit more. So with that, why don't we move to the next slide, and it really talks a little bit more about some details here. And I'll spend a couple minutes talking about this, and then we can move into some questions and answer again. So connections really have to do with a concept of moving from nodes of trail networks, like having a trail network at Donna Beth Littman Park in North Windham, and a trail network at Lowell Preserve, and a trail network at Dundee, to more of an interconnected network. So we're moving from isolated properties that you might drive to or ride your bike to or walk to, use the trails and then go home, but places where you can get to from places, or places that you can go there and then go to somewhere else using the open space. Those could be local destinations, like maybe better connections between Donna Beth Littman Park and North Windham business areas. They can be regional destinations. So whether, maybe it's an abutting trail network in a town next door, or maybe it's a multi-town trail like the Mountain Division Trail. Access and equity really have to do with the idea of, I think it really started with the idea of more neighborhood type of amenities. For example, there's a playground in East Windham, there's a playground at Donna Beth Littman Park, and there's a playground at the town office in Windham Center. But, should there be a neighborhood playground in a more built up part of town? Or should there be a playground somewhere in South Windham or South Windham Village that would make it a little easier for people to access? So it evolved from that neighborhood kind of scale as opposed to a large landscape scale. And I think it also has built to include how to get to places, accommodating a wide range of users at individual assets. And so that's an emerging category that we will certainly be thinking about when it comes to making recommendations. Amanda did note, and this is something we've been talking about since very early on in the process, is Windham needs a way to prioritize opportunities and maybe think about how to acquire the next big piece of property, or what is the next piece of property that the town would be interested in taking over. But I think that the flip side of that is looking at the open space assets the town does have today, and building on some individual property plans that the town has already started over the years when it comes to things like the new park in Windham Center. That is a park with a plan. Donna Beth Littman Park is a property that has a plan to accommodate different types of users and amenities. It's has a timeline associated with that, so you can plan individual properties to maybe do more things where it's appropriate. And maybe there are some properties that are strictly going to be more specialized properties, and those are typically going to be the less intensely developed parks and more of conservation type properties. So when you think of competing uses and multiple things happen, sometimes there's a tension between user groups. We've seen it in other communities: motorized access, snowmobiles, ATVs versus non-motorized, people who like to walk or ski. Equestrian horses are another use that is accommodated in some places that really doesn't is not compatible with other types of uses. So thinking about users, thinking about uses, and how to manage those things on individual properties is going to be something that we think more about. And finally, getting to that point about conservation, I think in the classical sense of habitats and ecology, we've heard a lot from stakeholders about the importance of waterfront riparian habitats, connections between water bodies and wetlands and along brooks and rivers. We've heard about, certainly received data from the state that the town has access to for endangered species and sensitive habitats. And those are important things to consider when designing and coming up with an overall open space plan. Conservation is keeping things the same. And part of what we want to keep the same is having the ability to have working landscapes into the future. Those are woodlots, those are farms and fields, and a big part of what makes Windham and really contributes to rural character and the things that people have said over the years that they want to see continued into the future. So good examples of preserving those types of things have to do with the Maine Farmland Trust and their involvement, Trust for Public Land, their involvement with certain farm properties in Windham Center area that are going to be working farms forever. But there's only a few of those. There's two that I can think of specifically. And there's a lot of other farmland that, 20 years from now may not be farmland unless there's some planning and proactive work taken on that land's behalf. So that's something to consider. And then finally, that really does tie in with history and culture. But I think that there are unique assets to Windham's history that are not necessarily about buildings or farmsteads. Certainly that is important, but I think that there's also important places, important things like how Windham is tied in with Gambo mills, how industry has taken place, and some of these places are preserved today and some are not. And I think that's something we want to think a little bit more about, because that is a big part of Windham's story as well. So, right, yeah. What are we missing? What do we need more of under access and equity? That was, when we think about access and equity, what was coming to mind is, the number of people who use the basketball courts, right? I'm only aware of one location for those basketball courts. So access and equity may be an issue. Maybe there should be another facility or several small half-court type options available throughout the town. So that's really kind of what we meant around access and equity, a more neighborhood level scale. Thanks for bringing that up. That was an important point to make a distinction on. So now we can go. That was a lot of words on that slide, and this is kind of what it's shaping up to be in a map or a graphic. And this is definitely a work in progress, and I do not expect you to be able to read this at this point. What I do hope you will do is go to windhamopenspace.com, and this map is going to be posted there in the next several days, and you can register at windhamopenspace.com. Go in, tell us what we got right, tell us what you like, tell us what we're missing, and that'll help refine this for the next draft of the plan. Additionally, you will be registered to, as a registered member, you'll be entered into a drawing for a $50 gift certificate to the restaurant of your choice in Windham. And you'll be also helping us get some important information that's going to shape the next draft of the plan. So with that, this is what you'll be looking for on the website. I don't necessarily want to get more specific now unless there's questions about it in the chat that come up. Where are we, Sarah? Is the next, we're gonna go into the next round of questions. And again, there's a poll here for those of you who don't have a specific question. But we do want to get to some of these questions that have come in on Facebook as well as through the Zoom meeting. So thanks.
So Ben,
yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
I'll dive in. So we did have a couple questions come in through the chat. So the first one that came in was a question about, are there any considerations being given to expanding the Gambo Road recreation area, MDT/soccer fields? There are 3 parcels of land for sale on the street at this time.
Yeah, good thing to note. We are looking at recommendations. I don't know specifically what the town's position is, and I don't know, Amanda, if you have any information on that, but I think in general, there is some value to, when it comes to acquiring new properties, there's some value to acquiring adjacent properties to land that's already in town or public control. To add onto existing facilities or expand existing networks, as opposed to a property that is maybe not as close to an existing facility. And that's really where you start to think about, how do you integrate that? How do you connect it into the network? When you are looking at abutting properties, that's already baked right in. It's adjacent, and it essentially would become a single larger piece at that point. So Amanda, if you want to jump in with anything specific, please do. But I know there's a couple other questions as well.
I think you're absolutely correct that there's value, and it's more of it's easier for the town to consider expanding existing assets by acquiring interest in properties adjacent to it. But I think there hasn't been any particular action taken on that particular property. And I'm happy to hear, though, I don't necessarily always know what is for sale. And so that's part of the issue, I think, in being in the right place at the right time and making sure that we're positioned to jump ahead into that. And while I mentioned that we've set up a fee, an open space impact fee, to have some funds available for that, I think we're also expecting, and there are already recommendations in the comp plan and in past plans, that the town actually, get serious about making some of these acquisitions by some capital planning and actually setting some funds aside to do so. But I'm expecting that might be another recommendation specifically coming out of this plan, but nothing specifically on that property. I think I wanted to jump in and just point out some other questions on the Facebook video, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One was offering support for a site for shows and concerts in town. And the other one was a question about, are we considering acquiring access to Sebago? And then I have a follow-up question on that, just as far as the survey results go, when you've talked a lot about common response rates about needs for additional water access. Did you have specific responses about specific water bodies and kind of thinking about how we might be, and how we will be gauging what the priorities are for which water body is more important to obtain access to?
The top responses, majority of responses, let me put it this way, the only responses that mentioned a specific water body mentioned Sebago. There were a few that were just broad water access points. There were a few that were specific to, swimming access versus boat access. But the only comments that mentioned a specific, and there were a few that mentioned Sebago specifically. So I'll jump in. There's 2 questions that came in on the chat. Both of them have to do with kind of loss of rural character and subdivision development. So the first one is about the Chute Webb Pope Road area. The person mentions we're losing much of the rural character of this area, and there's another subdivision going in off Chute Road. And then to follow up, I think it might be the same person, mentions another project on Deeper Road, which they thought was a farm zone, and it looks like it might be becoming a subdivision. I don't know if maybe Amanda has any thoughts on that question, or if Ben, if you wanted to just address
yeah,
residential
I'll jump
development.
in first, and if Amanda wants to talk again specific locations, that's fine. I think that I'm very familiar with that part of Windham, and somewhat familiar with the development that's been happening recently. I know that there has been a lot of concern and frankly a lot of work on the town's behalf in the last couple of years when it comes to how do we address rural character? How do we keep what we have, and how do we avoid losing more rural character as the community continues to grow? And that is a very real and a very sensitive topic for folks, because it often involves people who've been in the community, who maybe for generations have been in the community, are seeing growth pressure in parts of town that really haven't seen it up until the last maybe decade or two. And as some of these comments were alluding to, even a subdivision or two can have a really big impact on how it feels to live in an area, or how it feels to walk down the road in an area visually, but also from a traffic standpoint. People might be experiencing, noticing things like water quality issues associated with certain developments, particularly, ones that go through subdivision review have to meet certain standards, but a lot of development in Windham does not. So how do you handle the impacts of that growth? And the town in the last couple of years, particularly since the last comprehensive plan update, has done a lot of work in that regard to try and deal with the impacts of growth, minimize the impacts of growth. And I think, frankly, this open space plan is part of that. I think that an open space and recreation plan is much more than a growth management tool, but certainly by identifying areas that are important to preserve, are important to keep the same, and are important to minimize the impacts of growth, that will help the town and its partners, which include the land trust organizations, the nonprofits I'd mentioned earlier, and others, work to protect the most important of these places. And I think that, that part of town is an important part of Windham. So without getting too much more long-winded, I think that the idea here is that we may not be able to preserve every farm and every field as it is today. But by going through this process, we're going to be able to identify the most important, the most iconic, the most scenic, the most environmentally sensitive kinds of areas that'll help the town prioritize. So when opportunities do present themselves, or when the town does have an opportunity to, for example, when they're approached by a property owner or a land trust or another conservation organization, the town's ready and the town will be able to act on those opportunities. So hopefully that gets to those kind of questions around rural character. I think that both of those were kind of in that same vein about development in what is now a rural area, but it was more rural 20 years ago. Amanda, did you want to jump in on that?
Sure, just to echo on what you said, that, the open space plan will be, will assist us in identifying, again, those priority areas and be a guide for us to have more focused efforts to kind of preserve them. But the town's also been taking other actions and working on other ways to preserve rural character. I mean, that the effort in the last couple of years has been looking at zoning changes. We changed the subdivision standards with more of a focus on conservation, with some additional standards for buffering to protect the rural character that other people may see from public streets. We're continuing to work on some zoning changes around single lot development. In the process, we did hear already, when we thought about changing zoning districts for rural areas, what the most rural parts of Windham were that maybe would have that should have different standards so that zoning would be the tool to preserve some of those working lands, or to prevent the intensity of development that could happen under today's rules. We're not pursuing that to the same extent that we were when we had some public meetings a year ago, but there are some more changes and some other tools happening around impact fees, and the town just adopted a growth management ordinance at the council meeting last night. So there are many different ways to kind of approach the growth impact question, and the open space plan is just one of those.
So I was going to jump in. We had one comment come in on the question and answer on Zoom. It's actually kind of about signage and access. So the comment is that the public access to the river at the end of the soccer drive is not well documented or signed. People ask about where it is often, and many are still carrying in over the bridge to Gorham.
Yeah, this is I think this is about the boat launch on that soccer facility property. Is that what you're thinking of, Amanda?
Yeah, the newly constructed carry in launch at beyond the soccer field that was constructed by SAPI. Yeah, and that's correct. It's not. I would agree that it's not very well signed.
And that is kind of drilling down more into a specific recommendation that has come across our desk about one of the ways you create a network is to have some common signage, to have directional signage to other facilities. So I think that's a great example of working with a property owner to help make sure that things are clear, parking is clear, and those kinds of things. So when you find a place online, or when you hear about it from a friend, you can find it in real life, and you can get there, and you know where you're supposed to park and what you're supposed to do, and there's good maps and signage. So that's a great question. Thank you for that comment too.
There's another comment on Facebook about kind of the costs to access some open space amenities. So perhaps one way to help soften the blow of cost would be income tested yearly access fees for residents. We need some tax revenue for sure, but perhaps we can augment that with use fees based on an ability to pay. Those who can least afford the access are those we should be sure have a guaranteed ability to do so.
Yep, that is definitely an interesting idea. I think that there's a number of communities who have fee systems in place, whether they're activity fees, like I know that the Windham summer programming is an example of that, or facility fees, like the Dundee Park annual pass I know is available. That kind of facility fee is something that will get you into a facility, even though the rest of the network might be available for anybody to come and use, whether you live in Windham or you're visiting. And I think that one of the things that's really struck me as we go through this effort is just how open space assets in particular are regional assets. When we think about the places we recreate or the places we go to relax, you know, if you take that minute just to go through that in your own mind, not all of them, I bet, are in Windham, and not all of them are in Portland or Westbrook or Falmouth or Gorham. There's different places you go to do different things, and Windham is part of that regional network. Just like we're part of a larger watershed. You know, the Presumpscot River, Pleasant River, cross municipal boundaries. These recreational assets cross town boundaries as well. So that's one way to be looking at these assets. You know, there's certainly going to be smaller neighborhood things that can be done to really improve quality of life, improve health within those areas. But I think there's a lot of assets like Dundee, and maybe there's people on viewing this right now have been there when the Portland Recreation Department bus pulls in. It's very clear that that's a regional asset on those summertime days. Donna Beth Littman Park is a fairly well-known birding destination. People come from other towns to go visit that park specifically to walk around the pond and look for birds and enjoy nature. So I think Lowell Preserve is another example of a regional destination for hiking and biking to a lesser degree, even though Falmouth right next door is a fairly major mountain biking destination. So those are the kinds of things we'll be thinking about as we talk about connections and types of assets. It's a very interesting exercise. And I think as we go through this and we start to present some recommendations, you'll start to see some of those layered types of recommendations from very specific properties to, you know, maybe it has to do with the sign at a specific property, but also up through the larger, you know, ecological landscape type recommendations. So any other questions on Facebook or Zoom before we want to start talking about next steps in the process?
I had one more question come in through Zoom. So with North Windham being such a commerce hub for the region, would there be any consideration for a town sales tax increase to help fund these endeavors?
Well, I don't think a specific town sales tax is an option under state law, but I am getting the sense, and I have talked with Amanda and other folks at the town about these types of recommendations. You know, one thing we have not spoken about tonight, which is a very valid category of recommendation has to do with policy. Town ordinances, town policies that can help encourage or incentivize the protection of open space. Things to do with subdivision ordinance, for example. Things to do with funding. And I certainly, we've heard that a couple times this evening about how to help pay, how to find additional funds that will help build out and make the network of open space better. And that's something the town is going to have to work on. I mean, frankly, there is no war chest of funds in the town manager's office or anywhere else in town that I'm aware of that would let the town go out and do everything it wants to do in the next couple of years. I think that a big part of this process we're going through is, yes, the town does need to think about funding. Where will the town get money to do these things? But I think a bigger concept, a higher level concept, is that the town doesn't have to do this all on its own. There's a lot of organizations and a lot of individuals and a lot of property owners who would be very interested in working with the town, as maybe the town can play a coordinating role. So, you know, yeah, the town is probably going to get asked from time to time to throw some matching funds toward a grant, but that grant will be written by the land trust, or the Maine Farmland Trust could be doing some good landowner outreach and bring the town in as a partner. So I think that one of the things to be excited about and not lose heart about is that the town doesn't need to do all of this on its own. There's a lot of great resources and partners out there. And maybe if we have some time at the end, Sarah, I'm sure you've got a few good stories of people that you've spoken with as part of this process. We've been reaching out to individual stakeholders like the Presumpscot Regional Land Trusts, the local snowmobile club, the mountain biking group in the Portland area, the Maine Farmland Trust is another example, and there's probably 10 other groups like that all are involved with land conservation at a large scale, from slightly different angles and slightly different interests. But all of those organizations will be able to do their job better with some help from the town. And that help can come in the form of, you know, at a minimum level, just having an open space plan, saying what's important, will help those organizations find money from state and federal sources. At another higher level, the town being an active participant in conversations with landowners and with these organizations can help make them aware. Just like that example from earlier tonight where someone said, oh, there's a few properties for sale that the town might be interested in. That's awesome. What if the town could start to do that with other organizations and say, hey, we've got a willing landowner in South Windham, or a willing landowner in East Windham who is starting to think about larger scale conservation, more than the town can do, and they don't want to do or aren't able to do just, you know, a gift to the town, which would be wonderful, but that's not how the town is going to build a network of open space. So connecting landowners with those organizations and vice versa is another way the town can participate and really add value to the process, and not just let other people build an open space network for the town, but be proactive about building something that's going to have the most value to the community. So anything else, or anything, Sarah, you want to add to that?
We're good on question and answers on this end.
Cool. So we will have some time available at the end of the session as well. So if those questions continue to come in, we will make sure we address them before we leave. Also, if you have questions, once again, I'll point you toward windhamopenspace.com. It's a great place to read a little bit more about some of the work we've been doing, give us some more feedback, and have some interaction with Sarah, and myself, and other members of the planning team. So why don't we bring up the slide that talks about next steps. Again, another shameless pitch for windhamopenspace.com. Register there for the ability to interact with maps and other planning materials. We are on track to deliver draft plan in September, and along with posting the full draft on that website, it'll be available on the town website. We want to hear from folks, and I'm sure we'll hear more once we have more and more specifics as we get closer and closer to a final plan. We will be making revisions to the draft plan and presenting a final plan in the October timeframe. That is also going to be available on the website. One of the things we're hoping to be able to do is, as much as we love these online meetings, start to meet with smaller groups of folks, either out in a park or at a trail or in town council chambers, and start to have more of these conversations. I think that this is an important step in the process. And the more and more we can continue those interactions and move toward face-to-face in ways that make sense and are safe and comfortable for everyone, we want to be able to do that. But that web page is going to be kind of the backbone of the public process as we continue forward, and we try to build in some more of that interaction. That website will still be there. So that is a high-level view of the timeline and what we're going to be doing. Amanda, I'm not sure if you wanted to talk any more about other things that the town had in mind as far as, or wanted to see as far as next steps, but just in a nutshell, this is really where the plan's going to be going, so that hopefully sometime this fall, we'll be presenting a plan for the town to start to use as a resource.
Thanks, Ben. I don't have any other, anything else to add right now.
Okay, so we've been online for about an hour, and this is I don't know if it's the official limit, but it certainly seems to be a natural limit to people's ability to stay engaged. We really appreciate everyone joining us this evening. This recording is going to be available on the town's, certainly on the project webpage, and maybe we can talk to someone about pinning a recording, or certainly making it available as a video on the town's Facebook page. But this is a conversation that is going to continue, and I would say that the point for that is through the windhamopenspace.com. So thank you to Amanda, and thank you very much to the other town staff who are joining us this evening. And we look forward to fleshing this out. I think that this is a really cool opportunity for us and for the town to say what's important, to document some specifics about how to make the open space network better. We're happy to be a part of it, but I think that this is going to be a good resource going forward. So thank you again.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.